Imagine for a moment a world without art, without dance, opera, literature, poetry. That world would be a very, very dull place.
Today on the show, we have Tad Stones, an American animator, screenwriter, producer, director, best known for his work at the Walt Disney Company, creating, writing, and producing the animated series Darkwing Duck, Chip 'n Dale's Rescue Rangers, Disney's Adventures of the Gummi Bears, Aladdin, Buzz Lightyear, and Star Command, as well as various other projects and movies that he's worked on. He's also worked with Cartoon Network adapting Hellboy to the animated forum, and his latest project has been as a storyboard artist for the animated series Bob's Burgers. You know, Ted, I know you get this all the time, probably at every single con, but you drew my childhood. And not only did you draw my childhood, you wrote and produced it as well. So, it is a pleasure to, get you on the show and actually spend a little time talking with you about your career.
Well, thanks. Oh, to update, I was in Bob's Burgers the first 3 seasons as storyboard artist. And then my last project before I retired was actually Kulapari, the Army of Frogs for Netflix.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Man, now
Yeah,
I'm
I got
gonna
to
check that out.
I got to go out with the cool kids and doing a Netflix show.
Yeah, it does seem like that's what all the cool kids are doing these days because I mean, I don't know. The thing I love about Netflix, and I guess dislike it at the same time, is that, because they just grew. I mean, they just exploded onto the scene after they went public. They just had so much money to contribute to all these kind of oddball projects, shows, movies, and it's really cool because you see a lot of kind of out of the box writing, and especially with animation. And
Oh,
I don't know.
definitely. They approached a lot of the top animation creators in the industry and just said, do you have a dream project you'd like to pitch or you never thought you'd get a chance to do? And guys went in and pitched, and basically, as I understand it, they kind of put who you are and your credits and the concept into their logarithm, and it comes out with a budget. It's like, well, how'd you like $40 million to do that? Okay. So I expect great things from them. I just saw the trailer for Glenn Keane's Over the Moon movie that'll be out in the fall, and that just looks, it's like somebody, well, not somebody, Glenn, putting his soul and his heart on the screen. I mean, that just looked fantastic. And Jorge Gutierrez did Book of Life, has got a series coming up. I know he's been excited about. So I can't wait. I love some of the stuff that's on there now. I mean, I've watched Hilda. It's a great ode to the imagination several times through, and currently finished up Kipo, and The Age of the Wonder Beast is just by Rad Seacrest. Just another example of that's not an easy pitch to a normal network. Not that people pitch to networks anymore, but it is kind of like, well, we want to do this with it. We want to do this with it. And it doesn't have that feeling of being noted to death or pushed into a more normal category. It's just, this bizarre adventure with great character development of heroes and villains as it moves along. It's just great what they can do. And of course, despite the pandemic, and the animation industry has been chugging on forward because basically storyboard artists and the artists basically took their digital stuff home and just, send it in. I don't know who's holding down the fort in a very empty studio, but they all seem to, be plugging onward, which is great for animation lovers.
Yeah, and you know what's kind of awesome as well about I don't know, just like this explosion of creativity. It's I kind of think of it like you know, the movie industry back when the Hays Code was restricted, and you know, studios could no longer own the theaters. You know, so it just opened up for all these smaller production companies to get all of their projects out there. And you know, very similar. I think the dynamic is going to be the same with the new digital platform and these streaming services coming in, you know, allowing all these different creative people to, you know, more or less come in and do whatever dream projects they want, kind of get zany and out there. And I mean, you look at like animation, like you know, Adventure Time, right? Same kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, super kind of wacky out there characters. You know, the plots, you know, even though they didn't go anywhere for the most part over the course of the seasons, you know, you really had some good development for both heroes and
Oh
villains.
yeah.
And
I
it's
think the
yeah,
cool thing about animation now is, one, it still depends on time and budget. Mostly the time they give you to develop stories and,
right.
you know, create something. Uh, but what animation, just the how it was done or how it is done now, allows you to do much bigger, you know, more creative things easily. Uh, when I did Darkwing, was the last, no, Aladdin was also still on cells, where people actually painting the cells. And if you called too many retakes on a scene, the scene would start getting scratched and you'd get this kind
Right.
of dust cloud on it, which was literally dust from being under the camera or scratch cells. Uh, Whereas now all your coloring is digital. Now you can do a multiplating camera shot. You can do it on with home software. It's just really opened the doors to creativity. And I'm definitely not one of these people who think animation was better in the old days. And a lot of times, I got to say, haters online are looking at art design and saying, "Oh, it's terrible animation." And it's like, it's fantastic animation. You're just reacting that you don't like the way the characters are looking, but the
Right.
actual acting going on is top notch.
Well,
I mean,
that
I just love
they have
the
the
new
themes too.
DuckTales. The new DuckTales has animators on staff who can take key scenes and pose them out to send overseas to be finished. Plus, they have animators on staff when the scene comes back and they want to, you know, noodle it in a certain way, or an actor in an ADR session came up with an ad lib, they can go ahead and add it in. It's like, I dream of stuff like that. The and some of the acting I've seen in the new DuckTales is so far above what we were able to do. I mean, we were dealing with people speaking a whole different language. I was amazed that mouths moved in sync. You know, it
Yeah.
was just, it's night and day. And I constantly point to scenes to say we never had animation like that. Um, so there's a lot open, and even shows with more limited animation, like you say, there's different venues that people experimenting with just totally different storylines. You know, Kipo and the Age of the Wonder Beast, as I mentioned, it's like, that's a fantastic story that just is going places you don't know where it's going to go. So looking forward to all the new stuff.
Yeah, I was actually I was really impressed with the new DuckTales because, you know, I mean, whenever you see like a reboot of any sort of property that you kind of loved as a kid, or, you know, have that like sense of nostalgia for, you always, you know, expect the worst. I mean, we've seen that with reboots over and over again. But I mean, once they brought David Tennant as Scrooge McDuck, I mean,
Oh yeah, I was the
that
same way.
perfect, perfect. So it got high hopes for me, and I caught up with it once I got Disney Plus. And yeah, I mean, it captures the same kind of energy and the same kind of vibe as the original series. I mean, really, it feels almost like more of a continuation than anything else, which is
Well, I mean,
what you want,
they really went back to the roots, and the roots is not the 1987 DuckTales. They went
right?
back to the early Donald Duck cartoons, and then the Donald Duck comic strips, and then of course Carl Barks and Don Rosa's work on Scrooge McDuck, and especially the history that Don Rosa brought to it, after, you know, built on Carl Barks' stuff, and the old show, and just Donald's theme song, "Who Gets Stuck with All the Bad Luck." They made that part of the character and part of the storylines. Uh, this is a whole show made by fans. Everybody on the
Yeah.
crew grew up with it. So it's like people criticizing it. It's like, no, they're you. Those are the same people doing it. And plus, what people weren't ready for, I didn't expect, and I love it. I mean, once I met the guys and talked to them, I knew what they were doing. But it's not like, oh, it's like doing a new Mickey Mouse cartoon where we're using the old designs and who's the current official voice of Mickey, and you're trying to imitate exactly what was and then carry it
Right.
on with a new story. It's more like, oh, we're doing a new Robin Hood movie. Who's going to be our Robin Hood? Oh, what age is it going to be set on? Is it a modern day Robin Hood? Is it Robin Hood in space? Or is it a grittier medieval time? Or do you want to romanticize it? You know what it needs to be, the essence of Robin Hood. I'm same thing with Sherlock Holmes. It's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
is it going to be a period piece? Is it going to be in World War II, like the Basil Rathbone Sherlock Holmes were? Is it going to be present day? All those decisions. Is Watson going to be a robot? All those decisions you recognize as Sherlock Holmes, and you go, oh, well, this will be interesting. But that's usually not done in animation. So when people, tune in and things are different and, different voices, even if the original voice was alive, it's like, no, they're creating a new character. It's like saying, why didn't they get Daniel Craig to have surgery to make him look like Sean Connery? It's like, no, you don't hear that in live action, but somehow in animation, you're not supposed to change everything. So, once you understand that side of the reboot, and I don't want to see people just do more of the same. Neither does the company. It is called show business.
Yeah. Neither do the
There's
fans.
no point to just imitate it. Yeah. I was just telling someone today, a lot of that old stuff, you want to reboot it, it's to be inspiration. And Frank Angonis, who's the co-producer on the new DuckTales and the
Mhm.
head of story, talked about somebody who's taken a lot of heat for the changes and then, really proved himself. He was at a meeting with executives and they were talking about gargoyles.
Oh
And someone said,
yeah.
what if we did gargoyles like Teen Titans Go? And Frank, as a fan, couldn't stop himself from going, no. And then was very embarrassed, like shouldn't have said that outside. Greg Weisman, who created the show, said, oh, I'd be perfectly fine with that. I'd rather they do that, inspired by my show, do something entirely different rather than do a weak copy of mine. Or, Greg would love to do more, I'm sure, but then he's in a bind. It's like, do you turn your back on your old show, or do you somehow expect this wider audience you hope to reach to have watched every episode of the old show? There's no winning in that way. It's better to
Right.
say, okay, what if I take the central idea and we want it today? How do we do it differently? How would we shake things up? I've said of Darkwing Duck and the villain group, the Fearsome Five, as popular as people love Negaduck, it's like, what? I'd probably drop Negaduck and throw in Splatter Phoenix to have a female eccentric person there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Just because that's not about female representation. It's about, oh, that's a cooler dynamic of these different characters and having them work together, because Negaduck always was so far above them. It was a fun dynamic at the time, but if I was going to return to that, I'd like to shake things up and say, how could I improve that? So I love seeing other people doing it, and doing it well, of course.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's one of the just to take a step back, that's the one thing that I love about Disney is that they tend to put fans in charge of developing these new reboots or these new properties. I mean, they do it at Marvel as well. They put fans of the comics in these positions where they're writing for these characters and they care about them because those characters had an impact on them, at whatever, time in their life that they really resonated with them.
Yeah,
And
I don't know that they do that intentionally. It's just like those fans are of the age of filmmakers
yeah,
who,
yeah, yeah.
grew up with the stuff. That's why they're in there pitching those projects.
Yeah, well, I guess I guess kind of looking at when you first started with Disney, how did you notice kind of the company culture that helped cultivate and inspire the creativity of its writers and its animators?
Well, when I started literally 3 days out of college from my graduation, and they
Oh
even
wow.
said, "Are you sure you don't want to take a vacation? Because you won't get one for a year." And I said, "Until I know I have the job, I'm not going to enjoy a vacation." Because when I started, it was starting a training program. You had like 8 weeks to do a little film and learn animation at the same time, and then another 8 weeks to do a second one. And
Yeah.
you know, if you survive those two, you became an in-betweener, which I was terrible as and almost fired over. Um, anyway, so the culture, people don't realize how small Disney was because they think of it as, in terms of today, as this huge corporation. And it's like the animation staff when I started was 55 people, not counting the ink and paint ladies, as they
Yeah.
were called, because it was still done on, you know, acetate or cell vinyl. Um, that's how small. 55 people turning out Sword in the Stone, Aristocats, Robin Hood, you know, that it was just these tiny people. And the movies came out once every 4 or 5 years, usually
Hmm.
five, I think. Um, as opposed to, you know, hundreds of people working on those shows now, when it's CGI or standard animation. So the culture was this leftover culture from Walt, except it had softened because there used to be, as we were told anyway, a pretty strict hierarchy of, you know, the top guys and then who's allowed to do what. And um, that basically changed. It actually changed a lot just from the time I was accepted to the time I actually showed up on the doorstep. It was like a bunch of animators, young animators, worked on a featurette, Winnie the Pooh and Tigger 2.
Hmm.
And the rule had always been, oh, if you do this much footage in a picture, you are named an animator. If you do this much footage, you get a credit. And in what these guys did, because it was only a half-hour thing, they basically animated the whole thing. And they said, we're out of here if you stick to that. So suddenly it was like, oh wait, we have to change things. They're absolutely right,
Yeah.
because you know
Yeah.
this isn't fair. Which of course all those middle guys who had been there for 20 years already were going, wait a minute, how come we don't, you know, it's like, dude, get on board and start moving ahead. So it was a different culture. The um, skipping, you know, 15 years in or whatever it was when I started TV animation, it was more about we weren't sure what we were doing, and because we didn't have a lot of experience, certainly I had experience in television. I had come from feature films.
Hmm.
Um, the creativity was just not doing things in the normal way, because especially story wise, because you didn't know that was the normal way. I remember Ted Anasty and Patsy Cameron were story editors, actually probably the main story editors on DuckTales, along with Ken Kuntz, David Weimers, and Jim Magon, who helped develop the show. Um, we were talking about a magical item or something, and Ted and Patsy had been the story editors on Smurfs, and at the time, Smurfs had been the #1 cartoon show for several years.
Right.
Uh, and they were just talking about magical items. And I forgot the context, but it was like, oh
Yeah.
yeah,
Whatever.
you know, if there's a magical harp, you know, when Gargamel holds it, it's human size, and then you cut, and the Smurfs are on it, and it's their size, so they can play it. And my feeling was, and it kind of came from working with Art Vitello, who co-created Gummies with Jim Agon and Jim, it was more like, but if Gargamel has to play a magic harp with a toothpick, or Smurfs have to have 8 Smurfs working together to play the magic harp because it's so huge, either one of those is more interesting than doing the cheat of just, you know, it's
Yeah.
like, hey, here's a cool thing that helps make it real, that you didn't think of, that said like, oh wow, it'd be a magic item that you could hold in your pocket, but you just have to pick it, you know, to do it with a needle or something. Um, that's way more interesting. So it's kind of that sort of thinking of how do you make these things more real? And then conversely, when I did Darkwing Duck, it was, no, I want the tone of old Warner Brothers shorts,
Yeah, yeah.
except with Disney heart and expanded to 22 minutes. And, I had talked with an executive and they said, but how is there jeopardy if you can literally drop a safe on him and he's okay? How do you go to a commercial, and have people come back to worried about him? And I said, because he'll look frightened and we'll play scary music. And that's it. It was like, no, if you're entertaining enough, everybody knows that Captain Kirk was going to survive,
Right,
even if he wasn't wearing a red shirt, or even if he had a red shirt, he was going to survive. In fact, Scotty was always, you knew he was coming back. That doesn't mean that there's no drama in the episode. I mean, you can look at that in most movies. James Bond is probably gonna, because the actor's already signed a 3-picture deal. Doesn't mean
like
the movie can't, can certainly be thrilling. So
yeah, well, it seems like they had just like the idea, like the old Batman TV shows on there, where you're going to end with a cliffhanger and stay tuned next week, same bat time, same bat channel. But
it's like, I mean, that was such a silly show, but you still care about, the character, or you're at least entertained by it.
And that's what I think.
A lot of that creativity was just, the other thing that helped a lot is all the writers were on, the staff writers anyway, and story editors were on term deals instead of show deals. Meaning today, if you're hired, you're usually, although there's been a little change because Netflix keep hiring people away, you're going to be hired onto SpongeBob. So you get a contract for SpongeBob, and it's like, for the direct, and let's say you created it, and it's like, yeah, as long as you're doing SpongeBob, you're working for us. And you negotiate whatever you can within that if it passes a certain mark or whatever. But we were given term deals, meaning we like your talent. We are going to give you a term deal of 3 years. Here's your salary raises for 3 years, and then we have an option for 2. If we still like you at the end, we'll give you another 2 years at this salary. So you kind of have to guess about the future and all that. But the point is, you got at least 3 years, probably 5 if you're a main person, where they own every idea that you come up with pretty much. So what that meant is you could be called in to help out on another show just to brainstorm and stuff like that. And that was really fun, but it did help the creativity. You could go someone that you really liked working with on a show, but they're currently assigned somewhere else, and you can go out to lunch and talk about your show, or even take work time, to bash ideas back and forth, because that's somebody who knows how the studio works, who knows the kind of stories that are liked and all that. It's more useful than, going to an outside writer that you happen to know. You don't have to fill them in on anything, and especially if something that's supposed to be secret, of course.
Yeah, you don't have to keep those NDAs in your back pocket.
Yes.
So I guess let me ask you then, how are the writing rooms set up at Disney? Because I had talked to Roby Gorin, who wrote for Funimation, He-Man, and all that, and he was saying how they kept all their writers in these little solitary rooms working out one script together. I would hope that Disney's a little bit more collaborative. Did you guys have writer rooms and stuff set up?
No.
I didn't think so.
I visited the new DuckTales guys, and one of the first things, because they have a writer's room that breaks the entire season, and then the room breaks each episode, and then they assign the script to a writer, and then it gets punched up by the group. They asked me when I first visited, how big was your writer's room? And I laughed. I said, it was me, and then whoever came in my office and pitched stories, and we yell at each other until we come up with a story, and then we'd pitch premises and see if they got through, and we did it. And they said, I found a script schedule that I sent to Frank Aragonis, and he said, I'm pinning this on the wall and just waiting for writers to complain about the schedule, because we had to do on alternating weeks. 2 scripts were due one week, 1 script was due the next week, went back and forth like that. It was just insane. And the idea of, before there was pressures of production, that you would have time to oh, let's kick around some ideas for the first 12 episodes or a season arc or something like that.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
Gargoyles had an ongoing story and seasons arc. That was in Greg's brain, Greg Weisman. He kept track of that. He worked it out. You didn't have time for that. It was just, crazy. In fact, even at the time, I talked to some of our friends at Warner Brothers, because the animation industry, you could have two companies that don't like each other or are competitors, but the writers go back and forth.
Right, right.
And I remember that we were talking about either Tiny Toons or Animaniacs, probably both, where they said, oh yeah, we throw out about 3 or 4 scripts a season. And the idea that they had the luxury of having more scripts done than they had episodes, and if it wasn't working well, let's just put this aside. We couldn't believe that they were allowed to do that. If we got to, if it wasn't quite working, you did what you could, and then it's gotta go, and and fix it in post. But if you came up with ideas, you'd go talk to the storyboard guy as he's trying to get it done. So it was a whole different system.
Yeah.
And obviously the system is much better now. They feel they have a rush schedule too, but that's because they are so much more ambitious on what they're trying to do. It's just fantastic. And the art side is more unified with at least on that show, on DuckTales, more unified with the writing side, so that the art director knows to style things a certain way and in color because of the way the script is going. But they know that stuff before there's even an official premise out there, because they've been in on those discussions. So they'd say, oh, what if we designed this villain's castle like this, because that feeds into this story point, and then, that's just the joy to me of my career, was working with creative teams that we put together to do these shows, and to have that kind of back and forth with artists,
Yeah.
Evan,
So, well, I guess with all the different projects you worked on, which one do you think you felt had the best dynamic between the creative teams?
Well, I mean, my two favorite shows in my career are Darkwing Duck and Hellboy Animated, for utterly different reasons. Darkwing was the most fun because we kept thinking we were at the end, and then suddenly ABC wanted 13 episodes, and we gave them 13 that we had in work, which meant we got to come up with another 13.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, we thought we were done and started, slowing down, and then they wanted a second season. So we were kind of recharged and we could do 13 more episodes, even though with those 13, we had to go through the normal pitching process with the network. So I mean, that was fun. Everybody enjoyed the show. And actually, the show that never aired, Team Atlantis, was a series based on the Atlantis movie that we were being really ambitious. I basically was taking the position of, well, I'm never going to get to do a Hellboy show, even though I had pitched it at Disney.
Yeah.
So I'm going to make this my Hellboy. And it was supernatural and the same mystery and all of that. And while we were working on it, we were getting very excited. And then the executive who helped get us sold kind of turned on us and it was just at a certain point, because the writers are so far ahead in premises, we may have had 10 scripts almost done, but that means we have another 10 or more outlines and maybe even some more premises. So mentally we're like in episode 36, while the staff is just moving through the first half dozen. Mm-hmm. So they're totally enthusiastic while we're going like, I don't even know what show this is anymore. But people were so excited about those early scripts and we're saying this could be the best thing we've ever done. I mean, that was such a great feeling, a great supercharged feeling, which ended when we laid off 80 people on Friday the 13th because the show was canceled because the movie came out and didn't do what they expected. And that was all. As it was, we were sold to be on ABC Saturday morning, which at the
Yeah.
time had become One Saturday Morning, which was like all quasi-educational stuff. And it was like, I kind of knew instantly, it's like, well, that's not going to fit, because we were doing a PG kind of show, with action, adventure, and explosions and all of that. And it was just kind of being forced on ABC. So as soon as they thought the movie wasn't going to do well and they wrote it down, that was all ABC needed. It was like, that's it, we're canceling the order.
Yeah.
It was just terrible. And I'm happy I eventually got to do Hellboy, that got to do some of the stuff. We were at least able to take 3 of the episodes that were in work and turn them into a sequel to Atlantis called Milo's Return, which was 3 episodes of the show. And then we were given permission to do some connecting tissue to make it feel like one story.
Yeah.
And they thought it would be like 5 minutes or something. And instead we did 15 minutes to really try to make it work, and nobody stopped us. So, and even then, on one of the, actually it was my script, the ending that was possibly the creepiest ending we could possibly do, was changed in the final mix, and it's on the DVD as an extra scene. But I had to, make that change. So if you see the extra scene, you go, "Oh wow!"
Was it? So that was definitely
that show was really, as far as the crew being excited and the writer certainly early on excited. That was like, I think it would have been Disney's Batman, kind of, in that it would have been a groundbreaking show that's really was, even though based on the movie, so it wouldn't have gotten the same kind of heat as Batman coming out of nowhere. That would have been something special.
Well, especially with the idea of Atlantis, because even though the movie didn't do well, I've gone back and watched it, and it's got some of the best scene design ever, man. Just the different type of architecture, character design. I mean, some of the just the different action scenes are just so well done. I mean, it's that was the one with Michael J. Fox, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, our premise was basically, our premise was, there was a time when Atlantis sent, merchants and educators all around the world, and they left some of their technology and artifacts. And the idea was that when that crystal was reactivated, that it basically broadcast mystical energy or whatever. So those artifacts that you may think was just an interesting jewelry bracelet or something, suddenly is glowing, and it's a portal to another land or something like that. So the idea is that this team had to go around the world to get those artifacts. And the original pitch, which we were forced to simplify, was that, no, these crystals, because there was a gag in the movie, I believe, where Kita was actually hundreds of years old, as I recall. Or maybe I'm making that up. Anyway, so the idea, they all had these crystals, so they all were kind of Scrooge McDuck, ageless. And so we actually were telling stories of different decades, from the 30s.
Oh, that's cool.
Which would have really opened up stories like, this is World War II. This is World,
well, that bringing
we were told we couldn't do that because they said it's too complicated. You can't do that time travel thing. And it's like, it wasn't time travel. I mean, that's the kind of thing that Netflix wouldn't bat an eye about. They'd say, "Oh, how cool is that?" So instead, we just had it. We kind of set it in the period and just said, "Well, they're world travelers, and we'll do that sort of thing."
Well, I mean, that would have given you such an opportunity to bring in so many different genres to it, because you could have done like a crime noir one. You could have done, you could go like the 40s. You could do like, one of those World War II style serials, those old adventure stories. I mean,
well, you could do the old, when Lucas did the Indiana Jones series, and it was and much like Forrest Gump, he keeps interacting with these famous people and all of that. We could do that sort of thing. But it was, like I say, we had huge dreams for that. It was so exciting at the beginning, and it just, never got there.
Yeah, well,
I
I
wish I
mean,
had saved a bunch of the artwork and things like that because it's all, you know, all gone. Nobody can find it. I'm
yeah.
sure Disney TV never had the archives that Disney Feature has.
Hmm.
Um, and unless you know specifically what you're looking for, there's no way to do it. And a lot of it was just deleted or lost. But some of the artwork and the backgrounds were so great, and the vehicle designs and all of that. Uh, just we had a great time doing that.
So I guess how many of those ideas were you able to kind of segue over from Atlantis into Hellboy when you started doing it? Because I mean, Hellboy is without a doubt one of my favorite comic series. I mean, the live action movies, I mean, they didn't do a bad job, but they didn't really capture, what I felt the character should be. Even
Well, I
though
felt
the action was
I was,
there.
a lot of people, they go to a convention and they're a comics convention and it's about a movie of some sort, and the director always says, "Oh, I'm a big fan," and it's always like, "Yeah, because you got the deal and then you read all the comics or something." And it's like,
Right,
no,
right.
I was a Hellboy fan from the beginning. I was even in the online Hellboy.com
Oh,
bulletin
wow.
board, that there was a group of us who got invited to Guillermo's first premiere and all of that from Canada and all across the United States. Um, so I was definitely a fan, and my goal was to capture the uniqueness of what Mike had on the page. And in fact, Mike did because he worked on the original Atlantis. He
Mhm.
actually did creature design for our series. At the beginning, he'd read the scripts, and then it was like, just tell me what the monster is. I don't have time to go through the scripts. Um, and that was, a lot of fun to have that. And so actually being able to go to Hellboy, it wasn't originally, it was supposed to be a series, and then the people couldn't make a deal because it was a 3 or 4 way partnership, and ultimately what they settled on, okay, we're not doing a series, but we're going to do a series of movies. So they had the rights for like 7 years, so the idea was we'd do at least 7 movies, which in Hellboy terms would be great because you don't have to tell a big epic story each time. You could
Yeah.
do a movie where it's just the guys investigate a haunted house, and it's way more haunted than anybody expected. um, so that would have been a lot of fun, and the first 2 movies overlapped, so there was very little learning curve to them. It was just, again, working at a crazy pace. um, and then we had a break. I did another movie before we got permission to write the third movie. And then I had to do a movie, Turok, Son of Stone, which is the most violent thing I've ever worked on. And then I was supposed to do the third Hellboy, but instead the company was sold to Stars Media, and Stars says, we don't want to put our money into original stuff. That's not our business plan. So we did a great script. The first movie was Sword of Storms.
Mhm.
Um, was basically kind of a tribute to how Hellboy started, which was a bunch of short stories. I mean, not except we did them all Japanese influence, and I felt the
Mhm.
connecting tissue wasn't as strong as the short stories. Um, the second one was like exploring Hellboy's roots of vampires and Central European mythology,
Yeah.
werewolves, and whatnot. The third one was basically going to be Nazis, cyber apes, floating heads in jars. It was the mad scientist side of things with Lobster Johnson. And that would have been, we feel it would have been the best one because now we knew what worked well and what, was like, that doesn't translate as much as we wanted.
Yeah.
So it was a shame. That would have been fantastic. So.
Now, one of the things I love about Hellboy is that I don't know, but just the world building is so good on it that they go back and focus on like specific historical events. I mean, a lot of references to real world occultism. Let me ask you, when you were kind of approaching the project, did you like go back and like research any influences that you wanted to specifically bring into it, or were there any specific like comic series story arcs that you wanted to take influence from?
Well, I had been working with Mike because of Atlantis. So I already knew him. And when I left Disney, I actually needed some sample scripts, so I did 2 Hellboy scripts that Mike read over, and then he says same thing. It was like, I can't really help on these anymore for projects that aren't going to happen, necessarily,
Yeah.
which came in handy when, of course, they did happen. But no, I have a bunch of supernatural books right there. I didn't need to do specifics like that. It would be more about the actual story. So uh, if we decided, and again, Mike is a person who just is, if you like hire a car to bring him to your studio, in that car ride over, he's probably generated 3 ideas that for anybody else would be major motion pictures.
Right.
I'm on the Turok Son of Stone. I was very frustrated that it was more of the story of this, and some people love this stuff, but it was like, you killed my father and revenge kind of story. And the first script only had 1 dinosaur in it and some giant prehistoric birds. And I was
Oh,
telling
it
Mike,
doesn't work for Turok.
I said to me, classic Turok, because they couldn't do the video games. They had to go back to the Dell comics or the Gold Key comics.
Yeah.
I said, to me, Turok is the guy who dips his arrows in poison berries and fights T-Rexes. And Mike instantly came back. He says, he's the guy who dips his arrows in poison berries, kills a T-Rex, skins it, makes boots out of its skin, and walks and runs across molten lava. And it's just like, that's the kind of stuff you wanted to do. And that project didn't go that. I thought actually that kind of spirit would be more successful. But that's just how his brain works. So, I'm sure he would have, somewhere along the line, we could have mentioned a secret society. And because he had put so much of that into Hellboy, we'd say, oh, let's do this. And, it was, again, my feeling to be closer to the comics without animating any specific comic story. Like I said, we took liberties too of how, like, Guillermo put a romantic relationship on Hellboy and Liz Sherman.
Right.
And he also made Hellboy in the first movie kind of like a hormonal teenager, where to me Hellboy was the Rock, as in
Yeah.
Sergeant Rock, not
Yeah.
Dwayne. But he's the guy that, I want to be on his team because they tend to come back alive. And then he was already an adult when she was brought into the organization as 13 years old. So that was more
It doesn't
the
age
world
well.
I was coming from. Yeah. Well, yeah, not as a romance, certainly. So we didn't do that sort of thing at all. So it was like, we changed things here and there. Like I said, the third one actually would have been our origin of Hellboy. And I think we changed it slightly where actually the professor helps save Hellboy more directly, as opposed to, I'm watching this thing happen and it all takes place. And then, oh, here's the baby, what do we do with him? But that was, that would have been flashbacks. That brought in Obster Johnson to be closer to the origin too.
Yeah.
So there were little things like that of what can we do that's fun, still in the spirit of the comic. So who knows where we went. I know Mike liked the idea of, like those old Basil Rathbone Sherlock Holmes, that every story doesn't have to solve World War II. It can just be, that's a really cool mystery.
Yeah.
So the idea of just doing, how can we make this one totally different than the last one? I mean, when I didn't pitch a story to Mike. For the first one, we talked about mythology. And when I hit, I had a book on Japanese mythology, said, oh, that's really strange stuff. Let's do that, So it was like that kind of, stuff. And there were specific ideas. I was very tickled when Mike saw something. He said, oh, I'm going to tell people I came up with that. I said, feel free, but they're just little specific moments, that it's like, yes, the idea that here's this woman playing the Japanese stringed instrument in the middle of the woods. Now, later on, you find out the bottom half of her is a giant spider, but she's just playing this instrument. And as she plays, you kind of go in close, and there's blood flowing along the strings and dripping off, and it's just like, you don't explain it. It was just that kind of creepy weirdness that Mike
Yeah.
loved. By the end, we were throwing ideas back and forth. You forget, well, who came up with that one? And that's where you want to be with the creator of the character. But yeah, that was the one. Again, that the fun thing about that project was you always write for yourself. In that, I'm doing Darkwing Duck, I have to write what I believe is going to be funny. You can't distance yourself and say, oh, those kids will love this. That's what
Mhm.
kids love these days. See, there's always that, your sense of humor, your sense of entertainment is in it. With Hellboy, though, it was like I could play with, yes, they're going into a haunted house. This is not Scooby-Doo, where suddenly you have people shivering and saying, gosh, it's a haunted house. It's, no, people discover how haunted it is while they're there. I was very pleased with an image you came up with. They've all split up, and Abe Sapien is in this room with a big picture window looking out on the grounds of this mansion. And he's reporting by intercom to one of the other agents. And he says, no, nothing here is happening yet. And you see a little mist come out of his mouth. And he goes, hold on, temperature's dropping. And he's like looking around, the music changes a little bit. And suddenly you go to a wide shot, and that big picture window behind him is full of bloody handprints. You ultimately find out that it's being haunted by these hundreds of young girls who were killed by Elizabeth Bathory, who used to take baths in blood. Now that's
Yeah.
based on an actual
Yeah,
person.
yeah. She was one of the first vampire rumors
Yeah.
in
And we
Minute
got him,
Mouse, right?
and we got ambitious with our storytelling, in that, like the movie Memento, there were flashbacks that ran through that movie running in reverse order. So it's like, when you get this flashback of seeing the professor dealing with this vampire woman, that's the end of his adventure. And then you go back to the day where they're just about to set off. And each of those scenes nestle into a scene going on. And it's got it basically comments on the scene around it. And I was very
Mhm.
pleased with that sort of thing. Don't listen to the behind the scenes the director's commentary on that one, because I always do the same thing. And the writer of it, Kevin Hops, told me, he said, yeah, I loved it until, well, I listened to the commentary, and turns out it was a piece of crap. And it's like, I can't help talking about what I wanted to do with something, as
Yeah.
opposed to, wasn't it neat how the blood dripped off the screen, the strings, or, I regret that. But there's plenty of great stuff in there, and we're just getting warmed up. So that would
Yeah.
have been a fantastic project to see through. People say, oh, have you ever pitched ideas what are the ideas that got away? And it's like, they want to hear as if there's a complete show that existed. We just didn't get to do it. And it's like, outside of Atlantis, I pitched hundreds of ideas,
Yeah.
and some didn't get past a meeting or a paragraph, and others I did a whole pitch on, but they didn't pass that pitch to become an actual show. It wasn't developed in detail. So that's, there aren't those lost, juicy bits that you want to hear. Like, people say, what are the stories you wanted to do? And it's like, every time we pitched premises, if we wanted 3 premises, we pitched at least 5 or 5 to 8. So in one way, yeah, all those others were stories we wanted to do, but those were just premises. And that was back in the day where a premise didn't have to be a little mini outline. It was basically,
The tagline.
there's this woman she's a female Mr. Freeze, but she wears a tutu, and this is her hang up. And we're thinking this would be the dynamic of the thing, and that would be about it. And you either get a chance to do it or not.
Well, and I feel like, like with a lot of those like pitches too, like you're not going to remember those because they weren't fully fleshed out ideas.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
You didn't get a chance to really, sit down and, think about ways in which you can, make that character or that character more relatable or, make this plot more engaging. But I feel like, the ones that you do remember are those ideas that were fully fleshed out that you could have just made better if you had just a little bit more resources or a little bit more time.
Yeah. And even then, the memory of things, there are people who are on staff and they assume, in Darkwing, for instance, they
Yeah.
assume, oh, Darkwing was based on 2 episodes of DuckTales, Double O Duck and the Masked Mallard. And that's not true at all. It was Jeffrey Katzenberg walking up to me and saying, I want you to create a show called Double O Duck, but it can't be Launchpad. It has to be a brand new character. That was it. I had never seen the Masked Mallard episode, which evidently Scrooge is by superhero.
Hmm.
But I can see people on staff at the time think that, oh, see how it's, they're putting things together, and they'll go at a con or a panel and say, this is what it's based on. It's like, no, I was ordered to do it. If Jeffrey hadn't done that, it's not like I was sitting around with the idea of a Silver Age superhero duck.
Yeah.
I would never have pitched that sort of thing. It wouldn't have come to me that way. So again, it's people assume there's all these hidden treasures. They basically want to hear a description of more episodes, and it's like, sorry, I have to wait for the new guy to come through.
Which, I mean, you'd think that they would give Darkwing his own gritty reboot eventually. Maybe give him
I
that
would
gritty.
love to. I don't know what's up. I know the DuckTales guys have a huge storyline they would love to do with Darkwing, and you'll see a little bit of it,
Yeah.
but it's DuckTales. It's not the Darkwing series. So as more episodes come out, you'll get to see Goslin and Launchpad. And then I know the ideas that they say, oh, if we got to do a series, this is what it would be, because it's not as simple as, oh, we're going to do the old series. It's like, no, it's a different universe, and you've got a different relationship with Negaduck. And is that
Yeah.
going to stay the same, or will that change? And you'll end up in a whole totally different show. Will they ever get a chance to do that? That's, I haven't
I
talked to
mean,
Frank in a long time, but that's been a roller coaster. There's been times where it looks like they're going to let us do the show. It looks like they're going to let us do the show. It's like, oh no, they're not doing the show. We might do a movie. I don't know what we're going to do. Hey, we might do that show again. So finally they just, it's like, okay, we got to keep moving and just not worry about it. So I would love for them to get the chance, because there's, you will see the beginnings of their Darkwing story played out in DuckTales. So you at least get that, and who knows what happens after that.
well, I mean, that's a great way to test the waters, though. You know what I mean? Reintroduce the character through DuckTales. See if it's something that resonates with the kids, and if it is, use that as a way to expand back, or expand out, I should say. But to I don't know, I guess take a step back into Darkwing. You had mentioned earlier that you had influences from a lot of the old WB cartoons on him, and obviously he's had influences like the Shadow and the Rogues Gallery being influenced by Spider-Man, Batman, James Bond. I mean, there's a lot of influences. So just kind of to take a step back into what influenced you when you were a kid, what sort of mediums or comics, movies, cartoons did you really resonated with you?
When I was a little kid, brace yourself, comics were a dime, 10 cents. And then my first Marvel comic was, I always forget the number. It's Tales of Suspense. I want to say 38, whatever, Iron Man versus the Melter. And this is Iron Man in his
Oh
old
yeah,
yellow
yeah,
suit. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
And I was on vacation, and I bought that one. I also bought Tales to Astonish 49, which was the issue where Ant-Man became Giant Man.
yeah.
And there was something about those comics with that Marvel box in the corner that just felt different. And this was at Lake Tahoe on the border of California and Nevada. And as we traveled around the lake, this is back when obviously there were no comic shops. Comics were like at newsstands, at supermarkets.
Yeah.
It wasn't like they were everywhere, but they were in a common place. And you'd always search for them. And I tried to buy all the ones that I could because they just felt different. But when I was even, and that was probably when I was going to say 11, around there. When I was much younger, you'd go to the barber shop and there'd always be comics there, you know. And I bought, and that was the prime silver age of Superman and Batman and the Flash, when they were just way sillier and
Yeah.
stupider in a lot of ways. I remember there was for a while, Batman got more science fiction oriented, and it's like Batman and Robin are in another dimension, another planet, where the aliens can't see the color red. So they picked red berries and rubbed it on themselves, which made them invisible. It's like, okay, let's just go with it, you know. And there was a lot of let's just go with it in the comics.
Suspend your
And
disbelief.
that was perfect for Darkwing. And they reused stories. We used Sarah Bellum, I think, was the character who in Darkwing Duck, or no, she was whatever. We had a villainess who's got super evolved and her head grew into a giant size. They
Like
did
the
that
leader.
story in The Flash. They did it on Lois Lane, and they did it to Superman. They constantly reuse things. And in fact, at Darkwing, I told the writers, I said, pitch me the comic book cover. What is that image that you're going to see that makes you want to pick up the comic? That way, no matter how the story went, there was a visual core to the thing. And it was Darkwing as an old man, or, you know, Goslin dressed up as Darkwing and Darkwing dressed up as Goslin or something. It's like, is that a brain switch or some, you know?
Yeah.
You had something there at the core, you know. I loved our aliens that were hats. You know, that would mind control you by being hats on their heads. But I mean, that mind troll trope was like the Starro, the starfish that took over the Justice League in first issues, if not the first. So to me, that was the inspiration. And plus, I grew up seeing reruns. What would be Saturday morning were actually reruns of black and white serials of, you know, decades earlier. So there was Sky King, a guy who had an airplane, and that was his big deal. And he was a rancher with an airplane, which you think, how many stories revolved around an airplane when it's like saying he's got a car? But we also had the old serials like, I want to say Commander Cody. He's the guy, like the Rocketeer, is kind of based on. He's got a leather flight jacket. There's a bullet-shaped helmet and a dial on his chest that said up, down, fast, slow. Like all you needed. And then as well as, you know, Davy Crockett, Daniel Boone, Swamp Fox, Scarecrow of Romney Marsh, those Disney heroes that were brought out. So all of that influence, you know, along with all those Warner Brothers cartoons. Disney held on to their cartoons very closely instead of just putting them out on TV, where Warner Brothers cut a deal to say, yeah, sure, that's a bunch of money that's coming to us. So you couldn't help to grow up on the influence of Warner Brothers and Max Fleischer, because Popeye was on TV. And I realized looking back that the lunchtime in LA, Sheriff John was the host of the cartoon show right at lunchtime. So even when I was in kindergarten, he was showing Farmer Alfalfa, and I realized that some of these cartoons were silent cartoons that had soundtracks put onto them. So that was a great education for me to early animation and all of that. And then all the cartoons. And again, it's not like I was old enough to see these things when they were first put on the air, but they rerunning things. So there was an Abbott and Costello show. Buster Keaton had a show. They would show the old Laurel and Hardy's films. So I had a lot of that slapstick humor and that kind of humor, just part of my makeup. And in fact, I remember my partners on several shows were Bob Schooley and Mark McCorkle, who created Kim Possible. I remember Bob, this is when I stopped working with him, I guess. In fact, I'm not even sure I was at Disney at the time, but Bob said, we're now working with writers who grew up in a world where The Simpsons were always on television. as opposed to being this whole different kind of show that comes
Yeah.
in and upsets the idea of comedy and what you can say and what's appropriate and not.
Yeah, people don't realize
Just
how
all that
cultural
stuff that you soak up is entirely different, you know. And it can't help. It doesn't mean, oh, I'm going to pitch shows with the comedy of Laurel and Hardy in them, but it's like, that's part of my being, was seeing those shows and the Warner Brothers cartoons that made fun. There was always a skinny guy and a fat guy for some reason, you know. There was always a character that went ha cha 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 cha, who had a big nose, you know.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like Jimmy Durante, you know. So I didn't just soaked all that stuff in, and I always loved from early stage science fiction fantasy. So I would live for, you know, there would be Chiller Theater or something like that that would show old movies, and I saw, you know, not only great things like Creature of the Black Lagoon and the Frankenstein films and Dracula, but it was like The Crawling Eye, with, you know,
Yeah.
and The Beast with Five Fingers, all the Ray Harryhausen films, you know.
Oh,
Just
the
love those things.
was it the Beast from 10,000 Phantoms? That was one of
Fathoms.
yeah, Fathoms. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that was Ray Harryhausen's first solo work. That was one of my favorite monster movies growing up. But I mean, just his entire career is phenomenal. Whether you're looking at, Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, or even going into more like the Sand and Sorcery flick, or sorry, Sword and Sandals flicks. But just to kind of backtrack a little bit, just to kind of I don't know, just to expand upon, what you were saying there about The Simpsons, is that a lot of people don't realize how revolutionary The Simpsons were in paving the way for um, cartoon sitcoms, right? I mean, of course, the
Oh yeah.
Flintstones had done it before, right? There were other types of cartoons that would kind of mimic, or satirize different adult adult live action shows, but Simpsons was the one that just subverted the norm. And instead of making it about this happy-go-lucky American family, which a lot of them were, learning a lesson every time, it just subverted that expectation. And over the course of the series, primarily in the early episodes, you did necessarily learn something, and there was some character development. But as the show just went on, things just got wackier and wackier, and it really
Yeah.
changed the way, I mean, humor is even written now.
Well, at the same time, you had, instead of going from a straight lace, Johnny Carson, you started getting David Letterman. There was more
Yeah.
snark in a lot of commentary. Um, so comedy all over was changed, but yeah, specifically in animation that happened. And then, it went through all sorts of different stages. And the one thing that I, and talking to fans who try to say, oh, no cartoons are as good as yours, it's like, you realize I've heard that every 5 or 10 years. Somebody says, cartoons today are crap. They're not as good as they were when I was a kid. And they don't realize, the person saying that to me doesn't realize, yeah, I talked to the generation before you who said those good cartoons of yours were crap and nothing was as good as the ones he grew up with. And guess what? I talked to the guy before then who, um, it's what you grow up with. And in every era there's been good and bad, animation. And I think we've got fantastic, obviously there's some great CG stuff, and just 2D animation. There's probably more 2D animation going today than there ever has been in the history of animation,
Oh,
because
yeah.
there's just so many channels showing cartoons, um, and so many countries doing their own spin on stuff. You see such a different, to say nothing of Japanese features and anime series and all of that is, and how they've come into the mainstream of American animation too. And then a lot of guys doing these shows are fans of those shows.
Yeah.
Whereas you used to have generations say, oh, that stuff isn't any good or whatever. It's like, no, it's new ideas. It's different things. And I think now, mostly through Netflix, but maybe with other streaming shows too, we'll get a chance to see more inventiveness. I just like like I think I mentioned Kipo and the Age of the Wonder Beasts, it's just a different story where people evolve, good people, bad people, you know, the characters as they're going through the 2 seasons.
Yeah.
And you don't say, oh, they're doing the brain switching episode. It's like, if they do something like that, it's going to have a whole different feeling than what every show did back in the day, you know, when in the 80s. So it's just more likely to go in an entirely different path, and the way they display the characters are different. Again, my other favorite was Hilda, which is such a simple, you look at it and you think, oh, it's for little kids. It's like, no, an adult can watch that and be
Mhm.
totally blissed out by the imagination, the adventures, and the charm of it. And that's highly recommended, uh, again, on Netflix.
So let me ask you, do you think that shift really came from kind of, switching over towards the writers' rooms, just being able to have cartoons that are enjoyable both for adults and for kids? Because, I mean, Simpsons anime, the one thing that they did was mainstream, adult animation. I mean, you never
No,
really had
no,
adult
come on.
animation as a kid.
Think of the origins of animation. What was I watching growing up? It was Bugs Bunny. Bugs Bunny, Daffy
Yeah,
Duck were never written for kids.
yeah,
They
that's
were
true.
written for the adults going to the movies. They're very smart, very wild, and hilarious, of course. Um, and
Well, and then they take
the best
punches.
Disney
Right.
classics were the best Disney classics are for family audiences,
Right.
meaning mom and dad can watch the thing and be thrilled with it too, as well as the kids. Um, so to me, there wasn't a switch. There was more a big chunk of animation that moved away from it, that in America suddenly got the feeling of, oh, that's for kids. And I'm not sure why that happened, especially when Joe Hanna and Bill uh, Hanna-Barbera invented the way to do animation economically on American television.
Yeah.
And their first show was Rough and Ready, but I think or Huckleberry Hound came after, whatever. Flintstones was a primetime show with primetime writers, and it was like basically a sitcom. It
Yeah.
was animated. Now, where it shifted to, I mean, that specific show shifted down, but where it became early prime time to suddenly Saturday morning only, uh, I don't know exactly what led to that. Obviously, a lot of it somewhere in time, and probably through network influence because of letters they're getting, is people wanted babysitters instead of entertainment. It's like, I can put my kid on that. I don't have to worry about that. You know, they'll just watch it for hours.
Yeah.
It doesn't say much for parenting. Uh, but I don't know why the shift happened in that way. Again, the comedy shift we were talking about is people were just absorbing different stuff, so it's going to have an influence on comedy. And I think because of influence within animation, and the anime people have, and Miyazaki obviously, just, and now Disney too, embracing it, there's just more cinema knowledge, film knowledge, ambition in the people who are making the cartoons. It's like, I really want to do something with this. I want to, and the shows, it's not necessarily writer driven shows. The time stuff is because that's how the networks are thinking. It's like, oh, I need these live action kind of guys in charge of it. And the concepts are about guys running a restaurant or this situation or something like that. Something that arguably you could do in live action. You wouldn't be as broad in it with certain things.
Mhm.
And that's fine. They're still entertaining. I love Bob's Burgers, when I was working on it. Once I stopped working on it, it was like not my normal viewing pattern. It's like, God, I'm behind. I should sit down and watch all that. And Lauren's got a new show now. Anyway, you know, there's that side, the kind of the adult thing, but again, I look to Netflix to come up with more interesting things, and they've had some animated things on movies that are crazy, altered reality kind of movies, and
Yeah.
that's that's great stuff. So I'm very excited about everything that's being done, and not everything you can watch stuff and you go, oh, that's just by the numbers kind of stuff. That's kind of the babysitter stuff, you know. It's like, oh, they're no budget, they're making a dime, they're filling a niche. Especially when DVDs were more of a market than they are now. People do things because, oh, there's the back end market on DVDs is huge, and that's all but gone now,
Right.
because people just stream, and they have a streaming service that will cater to kids and all that.
So I guess from someone in the animation industry or just the entertainment industry in general, what are your thoughts on that? That the idea of like owning media is going away. That you won't be able to just like own a videotape or a DVD in the future. You'll have to pay for some sort of streaming service that provides that. I mean, at least from my perspective, it opens up a lot of issues as opposed to like maybe censorship, like certain things, they could just like a lot of those old Warner Brothers cartoons. Like if there's no more DVDs and videos, a lot of those ones can just be faded off into obscurity and kept in the vault.
But I don't know. Again, you can be saved by the business side of show business. As Lily
Yeah.
Tomlin once said, nobody calls it show art. Um, I mean, I have a rack of DVDs here still, and it's like, when's the last time I dusted anything up there off and actually watched it? Because it's stuff I love, but there's all
Yeah.
sorts of new stuff coming on. But the business side of thing that may save it is like, oh yeah, it's part of a streaming service, but wait, we can get another $20 from this person if we sell it. Right now you can rent on Amazon or you can buy. And why would they give up the buying sort of stuff? So if you buy it, it's yours. You get to keep it. Now it may be a file in your computer on a hard drive or something, but it's still yours. So I think for the foreseeable future, there'll be something like that. As far as series and things like that, you got to realize that this didn't used to exist. I remember I was still at feature animation. This was after my time at Imagineering. That the new management were saying, we're going to put Pinocchio out on videotape. And there were animators who were just up in arms about that. They just felt like, that's cheapening it. It needs to be seen on the big screen and all of that. And I said, wait a minute. Do you have a copy of Pinocchio? Oh yeah, I got a bootleg copy. How about Snow White? Oh yeah, and I've also got Coal Black and the Seven Dwarves that's on the same tape. It's fantastic and all that. I said, so what you're saying, it's okay for you to own a classic, but not the guy on the street, not the audience that we make these things for.
Yeah.
And now that is such well, of course people own stuff like that. It was like they thought these things are so precious they shouldn't be out on videotape. So before that, you have to realize decades and decades of TV shows where if you miss Star Trek, guess what? You got to keep watching, waiting for it on reruns, or
Yeah.
you just talk to your friends. Oh yeah, it was really cool, and Spock came up and pinched the guy on the neck, and it went on. It's we didn't have any way of recording. If you liked movies, like Ray Harryhausen films, you could get 16 millimeter or Super 8 film that were like this big and had like 5 minutes of scenes on it that you could hook up in your home projector and all that, and that was it.
Yeah.
So when you say what about this not being able to own stuff, that half the history of the medium didn't allow you to own stuff. So and there was something cool about that too, because if you liked the original Roots, 33 million people watched the same TV show every night and then talked about it in the office the next day.
Yeah.
That was culturally huge. The fact that there were only 3 networks, and if something was super popular, a bunch of people watched it. And I was shocked that in Russia, that happened to my shows. When the Iron Curtain fell, the first cartoon series they had ever seen were DuckTales, Rescue Rangers, Darkwing, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Randomly.
Wow.
They didn't have Russian cartoons. They had some animated stories. Usually they were based on fairy tales. I was told this when I was there. great writing, but minimal animation. They had some classic Russian animators, in theaters back in the day, but for TV, they had nothing like that. And suddenly these colorful shows came, and just secondary to the adventures of the show, they saw a world that they did not live in, of cars on the street and just the life in Duckburg. In
Yeah.
fact, they told me, said, Tad, to us, Darkwing Duck was not a parody. We had never seen superheroes. So imagine we're doing a parody of superheroes and we're having fun with it. To them, they had these two levels of, oh, there's funny things that happen, but oh my God, the idea that aliens can take over your brain, that's amazing. There's that sort of thing was happening at the same time. Every kid in that generation watched those shows. And when I had people standing in line to get my autograph or have a picture taken me or just talk to me, up to 4 hours. Batgirl told me it was 5 hours, but I'm saying there's no way it was 5 hours, even if you missed lunch. But we had a couple of cops come up to, and instead of my normal little con table, there was like 5, and I had 3 people working them down there, selling stuff, because I was brought there by a comics publisher, Bubble Comics. Anyway, at the end of one of the days, 2 cops came up. And this one guy was like a wall,
Yeah.
incredibly handsome, big wavy hair and all that. Comes up and talks to the guy, and evidently they said, when will you be finished? And the guy's got nervous. Oh, it's over at 6:30. We'll have everything locked down and stuff put away. We don't sign after that. We usher people out. And they said, no. We just want an autograph. And it was like, they said, oh, come right up. And they said, no, we can't cut in line. That people hate the police enough. We don't need to add to that. But the guys did come up. I wish I had a picture with them. But that's what they said to me. They said, every kid of that generation watched your shows. And I was not ready for the rock star vibe that I got to have. It's cool. I got it while I was, still had a brain to take it in. But the work we do, how it's going to influence the next generation or something like that, that's like an extreme version of it. That was just amazing for me, and just the effect the animation can have on people, let alone Simpsons and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's amazing too, because if you think about it, like that's probably some of the first bits of media that, exposed them to Western culture, Western ideals.
Yeah.
I mean, just superheroes in general, the ability or the idea that, if you have the ability to act, you have the responsibility to act. I mean, it's just something so American exceptionalism about it. You know what I mean?
Yes, in a good way. Yeah.
In a good way.
I mean, that's the difference now. It's like you have so many entertainment outlets, and often Netflix chooses when they want to do this. Like Amazon will do series, and each week you're getting another episode.
Yeah.
If you come in like 6 weeks later, you get to watch all 6 episodes at once. Netflix will put out, you get a whole crowd who watches the new episodes of Stranger Things on the first weekend. And it's like, oh, I had to go to a thing. Don't tell me about it. I can't go online now. It'll be spoiled. But it used to be you got an episode and you had to wait a week and everybody talked to it. So our medium was a more communal event.
Yeah.
That's kind of lost. The idea of, and it's kind of happened in radio right now because of the boomer generation. People can put a rock song to a commercial and it brings up certain feelings because everybody knows that song, not just that exact generation they're trying to hit, but a much wider window of people have heard that song and kind of have a feeling for that. Because Top 40 radio played the same 40 songs in a row over and over and over again. That was invented when I was a kid, that we had 3 stations in LA who all were top 40, and they had a slightly different top 40, and every once threw an oldie in. But that was in our consciousness. Well, now, let's say everybody still listened to the radio. Rhea has so many different stages, and they're so niche that people don't have the same thing. And now it's about, I don't know how you hear a new song. It's like the bar, because record companies guessed wrong and changed. There's no longer them forcing X many acts down your throat.
Yeah.
It, for a creator, they get to, you could sing a song and it's on YouTube and all that, and you're just fighting for followers and stuff like that. And your money is made just when you go on tour or something. But I wonder about what happened to the communal stuff. You know, if the Beatles happened today, would there ever be throngs crowding into a concert, chasing them down the street and all that? Because who would get a chance to hear about them? It might get passed along by somebody gets real excited about it, and you talk to some other guys. Oh yeah, I was all into them 6 months ago, you know. But there, it just, you don't have that community experience.
Yeah.
So I wonder how that works. Same with animation. Like I say, that Russian was this weird thing where an entire society watched the same shows, and some of their parents too who were watching with the kids. So that's such a unique thing. And today, even if you have a hit, I don't know what a hit means in terms of audience, but you know, it was a big deal when 33 million people, I think, watched Roots. And you can Google that if you don't know what Roots is. You know, this mini series, you know, in the same night, everybody was watching together.
Yeah.
And even shows that we'd say, oh, they were canceled because of low ratings. And if you look at the number of people who used to watch the show, like Star Trek third season, compared to the kind of ratings you have now, it's like,
Hmm.
oh, we would kill for those ratings. We would have a party. We would own the television universe if we had those
Yeah.
ratings, you know, because it's a different world out there.
You know, one of the first, communal memories I have was when everybody got together and watched the season finale of MASH. It was just such
Yeah.
a big thing. Everybody you knew was sitting down and watching it. People had parties for it. I mean, because everybody knew those characters, and because everybody knew those characters, it was almost like they were kind of a friend of a friend. You know what I mean? Because everybody kind
Yeah.
of knew their mannerisms and had some sort of connection with them. But I guess let me ask you. I mean, I don't know, like with this new streaming age that's going to be coming up, how do you think we can bring that back? Because one of the things I think makes pop culture so important is that even though you can be on opposite ends of the political spectrum, right? If you were a fan of Darkwing Duck as a kid, you can find that common ground and you can start to, kind of realize each other's basic and mutual humanity.
I don't know that you can intentionally bring stuff back like that. It's got to be popular on its own. It's like Disney Plus is uh, starting to stream Hamilton this Friday,
Oh, really?
and yeah, and it's the original cast. And if you look online for trailers of it, you'll say, "Oh, it's the stage version of it," and then they cut it and lit it and did it. That it's live theater is live theater, but you get pieces of it that it's a whole different experience, but you
Yeah.
feel like I've seen Hamilton if you see this thing. Well, I bought movie candy. I put my mask on and went to do the weekly shopping, and I
Mhm.
made sure to get movie candy because it's like we're all going to watch Hamilton, and I know a lot of people on Friday are going to watch that day. You know, the difference is now we get together online, and if you are a fan of the old Disney Afternoon, there's several groups on Facebook. There's certainly, people who are fans on Tumblr. There's fan fiction. There's different ways of enjoying things. So it's not about, oh, we're recreating, the stuff. I mean, Stranger Things, let's look at
Yeah.
that. I mean, millions of people watched it and know it now. They didn't get that water cooler discussing it the next day, or maybe they got a little of it on Twitter or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, and then people came to it much later and they saw the episodes, months or a year later. They're still into it. It's different than watching the X-Files every week when it was coming on the air. but they still have that common ground. So it's a matter of something becoming popular, often through word of mouth. Like, again, there are more opportunities for a creative person to get their stuff online and in front of an audience. Now, just because you put something on YouTube doesn't mean you're going to have 1 million followers. How people discover that and discover a video that a band put together, I don't know how that works, but the opportunities for a creator to get his work out there has never been easier.
Yeah.
To try to make a living at it or something like that, that's as hard as ever. It's just whole different ways. People ask me, how do you get into the business? And it's like, my experience is literally 50 years old. Let's say 45 years out of date. I don't know what a beginning salary would be. I don't know how. I was shocked in well, this is like 5 or 6 years ago, but I'm talking to my friends who are staffing a show. They weren't allowed to pick their own writers for the show. It's like, what? That's what you do as a producer. You say, I want this guy and this guy because I know what they do. It's like, no, that studio had approved writers that they could go down a list. And it's like, and that's what the guys did. And they said they turned out to be great writers, and we worked with them. We read samples and all of that. But it just seems like you're hobbling somebody, even if, say, okay, half your staff have to be off this list and the other half can be, will you show us those people's work and make your case, and we'll tell you if you can hire them. Even if there was that kind of give and take, would be more normal than not being able to pick your crew. So my question was, who makes up that list of writers? I mean, the guys are, this is, I forgot whether it was Big Hero 6 or something. This is Bob Schooley and Mark McCorkle. This is just before I didn't know I was going to retire. And so I was seeing if I could write on their show, and they had to go to bat for me. And basically, I guess it was Mark who said, you realize you guys have jobs because of this guy. So it was like, oh yeah, maybe we ought to give him a chance. Thank you. But I don't know. I mean, I get it too, because of the same cultural differences, I'm going to write differently. Except the zany show I would have liked to, that I actually pitched to Disney Junior just before I retired, was an entirely different kind of craziness than Darkwing. And it just would have been, as far as I'm concerned, fantastic. And just a crazy way, and science fiction elements and action adventure. Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to do that. If they said, hey, come in and do that show now, it's like, you're going to give notes. You're going to tell me to do things, which if I was still in my career, I'd have no problem with. You just take it, you make it what you can. But having been away from the rat race, it's kind of like, no, I'm learning to paint, so I'm going to do that. So it's a whole different world now. So I always have to tell people, I'm sorry, I can't tell you how to get in.
Yeah.
If you want my advice, it's like, okay, meet a wonderful girl in college that you fall in love with, and her roommate is the daughter of a famous Disney animator and layout guy, and you find out about a training program, and then you make a call to the training program, you marry that girl, and that's how you get into animation. Doesn't work for a lot of people that I know of.
Yeah, that's a very specific path.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I guess, I don't know. I think with the thing like Stranger Things, I mean, I think that when, as a creator has a lot of sincerity for the project, because you look at that first season of Stranger Things, it was a show that hit every nostalgic cue you could think of for, kind of my generation, kids who grew up in the 80s, and in the early 90s. I mean, if you look at the way the certain scenes were shot. So much influence from Spielberg, John Carpenter. I mean, it just took the best parts of all these things that, the creators grew up with themselves, and they repackaged
Well,
it.
exactly, and that's the point. They're
Yeah,
hitting the notes because they're your age, and
yeah, yeah,
they're
yeah,
putting the show
absolutely.
together. Yeah.
So I think if, as a creator, if you have, that level of sincerity, as long as you keep putting out consistent material and you are sincere in what you're doing, and have a genuine vision, like, it's going to resonate with an audience somewhere.
Yeah. And people say, well, if you were doing Darkwing Duck, what would you do differently? And it's like, I would do what the guys are doing on DuckTales. The adventure is more adventurous
Hmm.
and more cinegraphic as far as how it's shot and how those adventure be told. It's funnier. Those are the two things I try to do: make it more adventurous and more funny. Uh, and that's, that's about it. They've layered on continuity on top of it, which is probably something I would also do in a modern version of it, because I was doing it in the day where you needed standalone stories. And again, taken from the Silver Age comics I grew up with, there was no continuity. Drives fans crazy today, but it allows them to create their own backstories. They have an origin of Darkwing Duck. People say, oh no, the origin, and there's 6, I think, origins of Darkwing Duck within the
All
show.
fan fiction, or?
No, in the show, there's episodes
Oh,
of the show where I
okay.
told different backstories. And the basic idea was Darkwing has no superpowers. So when we did the pilot, it was about the way he got together with Goslin and Launchpad. He's kind of a Batman character. So what would his origin be? He'd say, I need to strike fear into the hearts of criminal element. I need a symbol. And a duck flies through the window and breaks the glass. He goes, that's it. I shall become a duck. Wait.
I am a duck.
It's like, yeah, there's no story there to tell. So I had fun with it, saying, I'm going to constantly tell different origins of him. But that was the flavor of the time. It also fit Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck kind of, recreations. Today, shows are more about continuity. It's about, and again, I just point to the DuckTales guys. They did it such a fantastic way. I look at Kipo and that show and say, wow, that's a whole different way of telling an ongoing adventure, and how ambitious you can be and how much world building you could do. There was a time where I pitched a version of both the Herculoids and Thundar the Barbarian. And Herculoids would be more, an adventure. I said, I'm taking the idea, but I'm doing it as if it would be done today, which is, this is not a story of a family having an adventure. It's a story of a young kid and his monsters. The family's still there.
Yeah.
And now I need to tell a story that explains why the kid's there and why they have science fiction, but they're dressed as cavemen and that kind of thing. That pitch didn't go anywhere. We pitched a Cartoon Network. They got super excited. They said, you have the rights to the Herculoids? We said, we thought you had the rights to the Herculoids. And that was like, Warner Brothers, they were the same company, but Warner's had rights, and they, but the Thundar the Barbarian, it was more of a comedy show. And it was about, because it was so silly, because it was so, it's great stuff, Jack Kirby stuff all through it. But it was like, this stuff doesn't make sense in a lot of ways. So it was, let's make use of that, where we're traveling through this apocalyptic world, and you run into, just like in Rescue Rangers, there was an episode people point to, the Curse of the Cola Cult, where this whole group of mice are worshiping soda pop. And it's like, well, what if we do that kind of story as they meet it? But the characters that we created of those 3, why is this princess going around with this barbarian? And it's because the barbarian thinks she's a princess. She's not. She's a con man. But he's dumb, totally in love with her, but says, she's out of my league. I can't deal with this princess. She's starting to like this guy because he's so open and everything, but she can't drop her princess act because she's afraid he's protecting her. She's
Right.
the most worldly of the world, as far as how things work in the world. And Ukla, I forgot his thing. It was actually a very brainy guy. He just didn't speak English and all that. And it was like, God, this is a fantastic team and all that, but we're gonna have fun with the adventures, and it'll be very much a satire on modern life in a lot of ways. But beginning of that, so, well, I got this idea of Thunder Barbarian. No, Bruce Timm's going to do something with that. Now, he never
Yeah.
did, but it was like, well, I'd shut that down. So there was great ideas along the way that got pitched after I left Disney that I would have loved to have done back then. But it was what triggered it was your talk of world building, because I worked with Ben Caldwell, a comic artist, but one of the best world builders, along with Mike Mignola. I mean, just incredible at coming up with, well, this is how the architecture is going to be, and these are the idols they worship, and here's the rats that live in the sewers that are, doing this sort of thing. I would have loved to have done that show with him, just for those fresh ideas coming in, and
Yeah.
who knows, great stuff. So.
Yeah. Well, we are getting towards the end of the show. I guess the one question I do ask every creative person that I have on is, what advice would you give someone who wants to get into, I guess any sort of creative field, animation, writing, even if they want to, go ahead and try and start producing like some short films and that. What advice would you give them?
The main thing is you learn by doing it. You learn to draw by drawing. Draw every day. I just heard somebody quoted today who was like, put a mile of paper underneath your pencil and just start drawing your way through it. And you just draw from life and all of that. If you'd like cartoon. I've always been weak drawing from life. That's what I'm trying to relearn now, and the paintings I put online. The writing is the same way. Don't talk about writing. Everybody falls in the track. They talk about writing. They, especially online, they talk about these cool ideas they have. It's like that takes up your energy, your creative energy, in that if you're a storyteller, I discussed this with Mike Mignola once. I said, look, we're both storytellers. We do it in a variety of mediums.
Mm-hmm.
If you're like saying, oh, I've got this great idea, and then you tell your friends about it, you've told the story. It's not like, oh, they're going to ruin it, but a lot of that energy you had is dissipated. You don't have that urgency to do it. So to me, it's like, again, online, you want to put out a Kindle book, write something, write fan fiction, write whatever you want, be serious about it. I will say this is, and you can make your own films, produce your own films. Look at what's online, say, oh, I got to hit that bar if I'm going to be successful. Is this a portfolio piece? Are you 12 years old and you're just want to make movies? And that's what an iPhone is for. You can just do incredible things now. You don't
Oh, yeah.
I had to stitch together Super 8 film with glue to try to make, films back in the day. All that opportunity is there. The main thing is just to try it over and over again, and to do it. And maybe you'll find out you hate that. Again, I grew up as being the artist guy, but I was constantly doing writing to give me an excuse to draw. Like I created a humor newspaper in my high school that basically I could illustrate.
Yeah.
But I get a group of guys who were all writing funny stuff, and sometimes, like, finals approaching, they'd say, I can't do this, we got finals coming up, and I would have to write the whole issue, and then I got into Disney and I worked in animation, and then suddenly I realized I want to come up with what the characters do as opposed to make them do it. As much as I enjoyed animation, it was like, I want to tell the stories. And then when I got to TV, suddenly I was drawing all the time with little character ideas and corrections on storyboards. But most of my day was spent on a computer keyboard writing. Coming into retirement, I assumed, well, I do some writing now because I've got these shows that I never sold, but now I can write them, or I can write them as a comic book. And some of this was, I started doing a comic book. I did a whole issue. And then my wife said, you can't I have a very small office. See this wall, the other wall isn't much farther away than this one. She said, you can't spend 18 hours a day doing that. And it was like, yeah, I didn't give up a well-paying career in animation for a non-paying career in comics. And it was also one of those things like, wait, what if this is a success? Then I would have to do more. And suddenly I'd be working longer hours than ever have before. And for what? And I thought maybe I should start writing them as books and all that. And then suddenly it was like, because of conventions, I was drawing more and I was dealing with artists more. And then, recently, like fall of last year, I started saying, God, I've always wanted to paint, and I've done paintings. I've been paid for paintings. But I've never taken a painting class. I want to learn that stuff. And that's, if you look at me online, I've been posting both my animation art and then these paintings that I'm doing. And that sometimes they're a normal landscape. Sometimes Godzilla's walking through the background of that landscape.
Yeah, that Godzilla one was phenomenal. I loved it.
Oh, thank you. And that's very small. That's, they're in this sketchbook. So, I mean, there was the beetle one. And yeah, Godzilla is only this big.
Yeah.
People who haven't seen it, that's what it looks like. It was like,
Yeah,
I'm
that's
trying to learn
almost
to paint. I'm trying to learn to paint by learning how to paint an alley. So I took photos of that. And then I go, why am I painting an alley? And made it more fun by just adding him in the background. So.
Well, and that's so good too, because that's almost like a photorealism. You know what I mean? Did you use oils on that one, or have you been dealing
No,
with
this is all gouache, which is basically opaque watercolor.
Okay.
Because oil smells, and I guess now there's types of oil that doesn't smell, but
Still takes forever to
basically
dry.
I don't have what I love the idea of that gouache is that it is opaque, meaning you can paint over a mistake. And
Mm-hmm.
since I don't have an undo button, I said, that's for me. I'm going to do that. And I basically, I've gotten some very nice input from, painters of my own old crew and things like that. Don Hahn, who I knew at Disney, who's, huge producer of many of the Disney features. He paints on an iPad, just does these things that look like incredible impressionistic oil. And he gave me a big He loved that Godzilla one. So it was just fun for someone just trying to learn this thing. But that's the advantage of now kind of chasing my old creative voices, or muses, I should say. Although this morning I thought, what about that old show? What if I wrote it more as a novel and illustrated it with paintings? And
I mean,
that's what you can do now. You can then self-publish those things and go to conventions and sell them at your table.
yep, absolutely. And that's
If
the one thing.
if
Yeah.
I ever leave my house again.
Well, I guess that's one of the best things about the current age that we're living is that, like, the traditional gatekeepers and middlemen that were there. I mean, they're no longer there. If you have the gumption and you have the
Yeah.
talent that you develop, like, you can go anywhere you want as long
Yeah.
as you stay the course.
Yeah, you need the gatekeeper, so to speak, they generally have, for instance, you can self-publish something and get good, or especially if it's a comic, you can see it, and then a publisher says, wait, we really like this. Do you have more of this? Can you turn this into an ongoing series, or is this a one-shot? And then suddenly it's like, okay, now, because a storyteller wants an audience.
Yeah.
So whether you're an artist or a writer or any creative endeavor, it's like, I guess Bill Watterson, creator of Calvin and Hobbes, supposedly does watercolors now, and then he just tears them up and burns them.
Really?
That's a personality. Yeah, that's a personality quirk I hope to never develop. But most people do something in a medium, if it's outside of themselves, it's like, hey, look what I did. You want to share that. So, but you're right. Now as a medium, you can just write, put things online. There are editing programs like Grammarly and ProWriter, I think it's
Yeah.
called. It's actually one I signed up for with a subscription because I was going to start writing more. And almost exactly when I ordered it, I stopped writing and just started drawing and painting. Although I just renewed it now, so who knows. But anyway, there's stuff that can help you reach a more professional level. Creatively, there are online classes you can take one at a time, or subscribe for a year and take any class you want, like schoolism. There is
Mhm.
an incredible amount of free information on YouTube. And some you can kind of tell, is this good information or bad? But there's a lot of pros who put their stuff online, or they do little, especially these days, there's a lot of live streams of artists saying, yeah, I'm inking a page of Venom. So if you want to watch over my shoulder, here it is, whether it's on Facebook or YouTube or Periscope or, some life's Twitch. That's invaluable kind of stuff to be able to see a professional working. And it's not about asking questions. It's not about what pen they use. It's like, look how they roughed out the page first.
Yeah.
Look how they did, which I got into the painting thing because of James Gurney, who created Dinotopia, who wrote and illustrated. James he has a blog every day. He puts out stuff, and he does all sorts of YouTube videos that are painting. Basically, that's where I got the sketchbook. It's the same kind of sketchbook he uses. Anyway, he has tons of them online, and he kind of teaches through them, but it's valuable just to say, oh, he does that first, and then that, oh, and this one he did differently. He approached it differently. And then there's just so much you can do online and network online. And like I say, a lot of guys are reaching out right now, and it's just a matter of Googling different terms and trying to find some live feeds and YouTube searches. It's like, I'd advise people, again, you learn to draw by drawing, you learn to write by writing.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean you have to do it on your own. You can stand on the shoulders of giants, or even guys who are just a little taller than you are. They're out there. So seek it out and see what there is to see.
Awesome. That's a great point to leave off on. Tad, I want to thank you for talking with me today, sharing a little bit of time. And, even though there's not going to be any cons coming up for you to plug, let me ask you, if folks do want to reach on out, have any questions, or just want to bug you about Darkwing, which social media handle do you prefer folks to reach out to you at?
Generally, everything online. One, don't bug me. What are you thinking? Anyway, generally I'm online, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all under my name. So if you're looking for me, I have a Tumblr account, but I don't have a Tumblr page because I'm just there so I can interact with Tumblr people, although I haven't done that in a couple of years. So Instagram is a place just to see all, especially if you scroll down, you're going to see a lot of me drawing original art that I sell at conventions. I do charity auctions in the fall for a big Christmas event. Someday I may sell online. I'm currently not doing that. Twitter, a lot of the stuff, I don't post a lot. I'm reading a lot. I interact with people, a lot of artists and writers. Politically, I'm toward the left. So if you don't like that sort of thing, it comes with the territory. Sorry, I don't post a lot of political stuff. And then, like I say, generally, if I'm going to post a piece of artwork, I do it in all three platforms. So if you hit any one, you're not really missing anything. Although I would obviously be talkier on Facebook. Oh, I always forget this. I do have a website. I have two websites actually on TypePad. And again, you're going to have to Google these, but one is Hellboy Animated. Try searching for a Hellboy Animated typepad.com, and that'll probably get you to it. That is a blog that I was told to do while I was doing the Hellboy movies.
Oh, that's cool.
It is there. I did one a week, I think. You'll see things as they're created, what the story was behind it, how come he doesn't look like Mike's drawings, things like that. I got a lot of letters when I just did a column on retakes, which is when there's a mistake, you send it back overseas. People said, we've never heard anybody talk about that before, So that's way in detail. And then toward the end, and I actually have to pay to keep it once a year. And I do it because it's a library of knowledge to me about, hey, here's us in the middle of creating an animated project. I had so much fun doing it. I then created Just a Tad, also at TypePad. It's a spinoff of the Hellboy thing. And I thought, I'll do the same thing as I work on different projects. Well, the difference is I was told to do it as part of the marketing in Hellboy. I did a little bit of storyboarding, I think, on Scooby-Doo. I couldn't show that. Any project I worked in after that, I couldn't show until it was already on the air. And then finally, so part of it's my creative musings and all that. And then, like I say, about last fall, I kind of created it. And it's basically what I'm doing creatively now, how I approach these paintings. And if it's useful at all, it's saying like, oh, I like his paintings. Oh, wow, he really hates himself, doesn't he? It's just like the frustration an artist goes through, what I was trying for. Again, that thing I talked about where you don't want to listen to the director's commentaries on my projects because I always sound more depressed. There is some of that. There are, when I label a success and stuff going on, but that's, you read a few and it's either to your taste or not. But that started last fall. So again, you just search for my name. If you search Tad Stone's podcast, you'll come up with 100 podcasts, not as good as this one. And again, just search for me by name. And it'll be pretty obvious by content whether you got the right Tad Stones or not.
Yeah, absolutely. So
And if you find a guy dressed like Indiana Jones, who's an archaeologist, that's not me. That's an animated cartoon done, I believe, in Germany or something. And that Tad Stones comes up in all my searches. That's somebody else.
Oh man, now I'm gonna have to look up that cartoon because that just sounds.
He's had 2 movies, I think.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh man, you gotta love those European ripoffs. All right, so folks, go ahead, give him a like, give him a subscribe, and you know what? Follow his website for all updates and blogs concerning his paintings. Because honestly, as a painter myself, I love what you're doing, and I have been following a lot of that closely, and I will continue to give you some likes every time you post something new. But
great.
Yeah, want to thank you again for coming on the show, sharing a little bit of time with us. And then, folks, give them a like, give them subscribe because we are out of here.